Welcome to another Glenbrook Podcast, at a second in our current season, and we welcome Tom Sinclair, who works as a Senior Director in the Capital Markets team in Manchester and is responsible for residential, multifamily and build-to-rent transactions. Tom's interesting because I called his father last night, and there's not many people where they come in the podcast one day and the night before I'm calling their father. But actually, it's really interesting that Tom's dad is a senior person in the property industry, and Tom is a senior person but one generation down. And Tom suggested I might want to call all of our podcast guests in futures fathers or parents and have a chat with them, but I didn't discuss you at all last night, so it's I don't have any dirt on you at all. So.
It's an important part of the potential background story you could get on people. Definitely a new precedent, I think, to roll out.
So Tom's dad was at Bruntwood for many years and is the chief executive of the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter and also Scion Tech there, but we won't talk about your dad one more time, so apologies for bringing your dad into it. Tom's a bit of a child genius really, and you'll hate me saying this, but has achieved great things and is still, you're barely 30? Just turned 30, 31, and has achieved great things, was listed in the Resi Stars of the Future in 2018 in the residential sector, and has certainly achieved everything he set out to do, and is undertaking many multi-million pound deals and has done a number for us, and that's why I wanted to get him in here today, because the best or the biggest part of Glenbrook is build-to-rent transactions, and Tom is running a number of those for us. But first of all, we're going to talk a bit about how you got into property and what your background is, and then we're going to talk about your current role and why you've been at CBRE in Manchester for, I looked it up, 9 years and 6 months. We're also then going to talk about the build-to-rent sector a bit more generally and funding, and talk about has the market seen a whole cycle, because 10 years ago there was no market, or a very, very sparse market, and now I think it's almost come full cycle with what's been going on in recent years. And then talk about the depth of the market and the potential in the future for build-to-rent transactions, whether the current interest in the market is going to continue. And then I'm also going to ask you a bit about what you do in your spare time, but we'll keep that for the end. So tell me, Tom, I've done my digging, as you'd expect. You're a Scouser. Is that right?
I maybe hadn't expected you to do so much digging. That's a particularly uncomfortable start to a podcast. You managed to mention my dad in great length. You managed to mention the age at which I've got to be SD at CBRE, and some self-promotion in terms of Property Week Awards and whatever else. So
well, it was top of the list on Google. When I Googled your name, it was top of the list, the Resi 2018, which was, I mean it sincerely, was a pretty big achievement.
Thank you. No, it's been a very fun last 9 or 10 years at CBRE. I think very fortunate to be grounded in an office with lots of very good people who you know, in a market that's seen a phenomenal amount of growth. And with clients that we both have built up trusted relationships with, so that we can go and do lots of business together.
And a good sign of that is the fact that we've done one deal and carried on doing deals. I think you know, we both do repeat business with the people we do business with, and that's a good sign of people who are successful. So, but I'm not going to let you get away without talking about your childhood and whether you are a Scouser or not. So tell me about where you're from and what's your route through to working for CBRE.
Yeah, so I grew up in a village called Parbold, Lancashire, not too far from Wigan. My friends like to remind me I have a Wigan postcode. My colleagues like to remind me I went to school in Liverpool, so I guess that qualifies me as a Scouser.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure you are a Scouser.
I was back over to college in Wigan again, okay. and then off up to Newcastle for university. So I've travelled around and firmly settled with my northern roots.
Do you think, you know, because you were wanting to be a lawyer, do you think your dad had an influence on you in terms of property, or was it just the thing that was talked about most at home and that was that?
It's helpful. It was a helpful guide at a moment in time that it suited. So I guess for benefit of people watching, my dad isn't a property developer per se, hasn't really worked in in property as you might consider it from our perspective now. He originally had a kind of nightclub business in Manchester, went into events, moved on from that into marketing roles with a real estate.
Podcast with your dad.
We are at risk of doing him a disservice by talking that. His background is far more interesting now in all of those different kind of facets of life. But it coincided with while I was at university, he moved into a role in Bruntwood, having been at Midas, the inward investment agency in Manchester, and Michael Ogles being the founder of Bruntwood, being on the board of both businesses. So it was clearly an influence and helpful in terms of that kind of initial work experience and understanding of what part of the industry I ended up in. I believe that I'd have probably ended up somewhere anyway, but I don't know whether that had been in planning or developer or what. But clearly I've ended up on the agency side. And then my brother Joe has done the same thing, so he's now at B8 Real Estate, specialising in industrial investment.
So you're both in beds and sheds. Beds and sheds are the two really hot markets. And it's really interesting that you're both gravitated. Before they were probably as popular as they are, we'll talk about you coming into residential now, but certainly beds and sheds is where it's at, and the Sinclair family have it all buttoned up between you both. So you graduated from Manchester, you got the job on the milk round to go to CBRE, and it's your first day at CBRE. Where was the office then?
The office was at Belvedere, so round the corner from where we are now. It was I can't mention my joining of CBRE without referencing John Ogden, who's the managing director of the office and has featured on one of your previous podcasts.
I was thinking, oh my goodness me, we've had John here sat in this seat or one of the other seats. And a really good chat, and interestingly, both of you didn't have a necessarily traditional trajectory into property in the sense of you didn't come directly into it or weren't hell bent on it forever. So it's interesting you both come in. So on your first day, did you meet John?
So I was initially interviewed by Will Kennan, who now forms part of the same capital markets team as me in Manchester, and his reputation precedes him in being a mercurial talent of buying and selling office buildings, and has been the preeminent agent in that capacity. At the time he interviewed me, I think that was still relatively early in his career as well. And then I got the John Ogden headlock caught in come and work at CBRE, and I must have had 10 phone calls a day for 4 weeks. And I'm very glad I did, and ever since it's been a wonderful place to work. There's a teamship, I think, that sits alongside everything that we do, which makes it an ambitious but entrepreneurial place, and has clearly allowed me to focus on what I've been doing since on the resi side.
And were you going around different departments then for the first 2 years while you qualified, or did you go straight to capital markets and stay there?
No, I started in development. So when I started at CBRE, it was before, I guess, the inception of build to rent. It wasn't a market at that moment in time. And while we had a successful capital markets division, I with my kind of interest in development, I moved straight into our development consulting division, and spent a year or so working in development consulting. So we're advising landowners, developers on buying sites, what to then do with that site, and it happened that moment in time coincided with the initial inception of build to rent. So I joined CBRE back in about 2015. You'll have done the keel in
September 2014 from my notes.
There you go. So those things coincide. Yeah. So I was very fortuitous to join an ambitious business at a point in time that there wasn't kind of any headroom in the sector. So it allowed me as a new graduate into the office the opportunity to upskill very quickly in understanding the dynamics of a market where there aren't a whole lot of people who've been doing it for many years before.
So just to put it into perspective, I think that's really interesting. I've not even thought about that in my preparation, my notes, is that the keel, we identified the keel in 2011-12, and we were working very hard to get funding and struggling to get funding. We had a fund, we had the L&G lined up, but it was an income strip with the Housing Association.
Yep.
And that failed ultimately because of Homes England, as was then, not supporting that transaction. And then we went off and we spoke to JLL, who had didn't have a capital markets build to rent team. They had the residential team who were doing sales, who were jobbing in that area. So I presume CBRE and everybody else was the same, didn't have a dedicated residential capital markets team.
No, and indeed CBRE don't have those other functions. So we don't do lettings, we don't do management, we don't do sales. But what we do have is phenomenal capital markets divisions. So we know implicitly what institutional investment capital is targeting in the market, and there's still the case today as it was then. You start to understand that, in the case of Moorfield, that they had a sectoral strategy to invest in those types of real estate, and so you can start to understand maybe what the investor wanted. We had a knowledge of being grounded here, what developers were doing and thinking about, and then it was evolving and learning that skill set and how that then applies to residential more specifically.
So you ended up on the first day in the development team. Who was heading up the development team then?
The heads of the development team were Stephen Verity and Nick Mullins, were alongside then John Dunlop and Alistair Chapman. And
Alistair
lots
is
of names
going great guns still at CBRE. And then did you do a rotation then from there?
I then rotated into our lease consultancy team. I spent 18 months reading leases. Under the supervision of Fiona Halliwell, who again was a phenomenal mentor at that point in time. It was a point of transition for that team. There was a changing of people who had been there for a very long time, and it was about getting under the skin of that workload and going through it. So I'd love to say it was brilliant for my APC and passing all of those qualifications. I'd love to say I read lots of leases now. I think in practice I probably practiced a whole load of commercial property things and then moved away from it, but a lot of the lessons and learnings of that are clearly still relevant.
And you can talk about it with knowledge as opposed to not having actually.
Yeah. And
so you did your APC?
And so I did my APC, Passed.
And then what happened?
So I guess while working in lease consultancy, I was there to serve a purpose in helping to fill a resourcing void at a moment in time. That team needed it, but I never lost the passion for development, beds, etc. So we did while working in L&T, I did a big deal with Unite on Upper Brook Street, on New Wakefield Street, in Manchester, which has become the big tower that you can see from Oxford Road train station.
With a couple of lights I walked past it today, and a couple of lights are not working, so if Unite are watching this, you need to go and change a few bulbs.
Change your light bulbs. So I continue to do that and continue to remain active in the development market. On qualification of APC, I then moved briefly back into the development team at CBRE to continue what was being done before, and very quickly realised that you could do a little bit of build to rent in that kind of environment. You could speak to developers, you could speak to the local authorities about what this was, but you never really had the full access to the capital that then presents the opportunity. And at that point in time, I had a conversation with Colin Thomason, who leads our capital markets team up here in Manchester, and has been a phenomenal kind of guide throughout my career in terms of how to approach the market. Colin's background is all around development funding, structuring joint ventures, the more complicated side of the real estate arena. So a bit of experience I had in residential and development, the ability to engage with my wider colleagues on where the capital's coming from and how you structure the more challenging components of the deals that we now work on, and we're fast forward to where we are today, and we're the most active build to rent funding advisor in the north of England.
And then some. The bit I'm interested in is so when you did your APC, you obviously knew that build to rent was a sector that was coming. You personally did. CBRE would have known. There was a few people like Essential Living or Essential Land down in London were starting to be formed to do this sort of thing. Who was it made the charge at CBRE in Manchester to build a team or to go after it? Was it you, or was it Colin, or who sort of spearheaded that? So somebody, it wouldn't have just happened by chance. Somebody actually took the charge. It sounds like it might have been you there in terms of
it would have been me and Colin. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it recognised the moment in time that the institutionalisation of the rental market was happening, was coming. It was being talked about more and more, and the opportunity is evident. And so it was something that I was spending all of my time working on, but probably with two arms tied behind my back, and the opportunity to move into Collins Capital Markets team was to lead on that new structure. So since making that move as a newly qualified surveyor, I've led that division in the north at CBRE and been able to be involved in some very big and very high profile transactions. I think there's a couple that probably stand out in making that step change from being a kind of an advisor who can do build to rent through to a kind of a recognised specialist, I guess, up here, and one of those would have been Deansgate Square, which was an early deal that I advised L&G on acquiring from Renica. So we must have been 2018-ish. We acquired the North Tower at Deansgate Square, which was a £100 million transaction, full commitment. I don't think it was a point in time that investors were still getting comfortable with the idea of going in Manchester in a city with swelling residential pipeline. Adam Russell at L&G and Dan Batterton made that jump and believed in the thesis that we showed them of the success that could come of it. And it was a brilliant experience, and I'm still incredibly proud when we walked past Deansgate at the deal that we were able to do with Renica down there, the repeat deal that we then did with L&G on the second tower at Deansgate Square, and now fast forward to where we are today, and we've just been involved with L&G in recycling the capital for that North Tower again. So,
which is phenomenal, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, indeed. We hope it keeps on giving for the foreseeable, but that's the kind of intangibility of working in real estate that I absolutely love. You get to see the buildings that you're involved in. Working in Manchester, we get to pass them every day, and there's kind of the sense of pride that instills, which I'm sure you find more than most, given that you're the developer and I'm the simple agent. But it is impressive, I think.
The thing I'm really interested in with you and CBRE is 10 years ago there was no market. There was no market really. It was being done as a hodgepodge. There were certain players starting to emerge. And because there was no real market, or it wasn't an institutionalised product, build to rent it wasn't even called build to rent. We called it PRS 10 years ago. Obviously there were players there that were willing to take greater risks, so the likes of Moorfield and other players. And there weren't many institution pension funds like L&G and M&G. But then what's happened over the ensuing years is that the gamble became less risky, and therefore it became more institutionalised. But we're back, we did our first deal ever with Moorfield, and we did another one just before Christmas with Moorfield. So in the 10 years that's taken place, have we seen a full cycle in the build-to-rent funding market? Is there a curve that we've been through, and we are now back to riskier capital because of where we are today in the funding market? Or are all players present and level, and it's just depending on the deals?
It's an interesting perspective, and one I probably hadn't thought about in going the whole way around back to Moorfield. I do think we were at the time you did the Keel, that was a moment in time where it was a new sector, and you had to be prepared to take a chance on ultimately a sector that hadn't yet been proven. And we're probably back in a similar-ish market where there's an uncertainty around interest rates, but I think what has been proven in the meantime is the occupational demand for this product is insatiable, and we see that across the market. Whichever part of the UK you work in, there is waiting lists to live in build to rent, there is rental growth year on year because there isn't enough good quality accommodation, and I think that is recognised by funds. So we are seeing lots and lots of core capital that is allocating to invest in the sector, and we're still seeing lots of deals happen. Just last year you and I did a deal with Legal & General at Whitehall Riverside in Leeds, which is clearly a very core mandate and very different to the approach of Moorfield. But I think moments of dislocation in the market are what present the opportunity for different types of capital to come in and look at ways to deliver new homes. And I think that's the most important thing, is how do we deliver more new homes regardless of who it is that's doing it and how the cycle is moving. And I think maybe that's the most important part when you're suggesting have we been through a full cycle.
Yeah.
I think we're still at the inception of this market. There is a huge opportunity. To give you some context to scale, there's 100,000 completed operational build-to-rent units in the UK. There's 5 million PRS households. We're not touching the surface. Everything that's built-to-rent from completed to pipeline is still only 250,000. What we now have in front of us is learnings of the last 5 or 10 years that give you a sense of what's been done wrong, what could be done differently, what could be done better, and now we have the opportunity to kind of reset and recalibrate and go after increased delivery volumes. Stop thinking so much about short-term questions on supply. We've had that a lot in Manchester. Everybody wants to know whether this city's board. Everyone did want to know whether the city was oversupplied. In practice, we saw 11,000 built-to-rent apartments completed in Manchester. They're all full. And you kind of look at it now and say, it's no surprise they're all full. There's 2.8 million people that live in Greater Manchester. 11,000 institutionally owned apartments is just a fraction of what that population would require. And so I think that's the exciting bit going forward.
So one of the things that jumps to mind is that when we modelled Volks, which was our scheme with the running track on the roof, we modelled 18 months to let up, and I think it was done in 6. And I think there is a double-edged sword on let-up rates, because you let them too quickly and you're causing problems for yourself down the line for various reasons, and you do it too slow and you've got a drag on your IRR. These schemes could be let up on the first day. If you could get all the furniture and the all the clothes and everything else in, you could probably let all these schemes up on the first day. What are you currently modelling in terms of let-up rates?
I think it varies on size of scheme. The market standard would be anything from 25 to 30 units a month. That's been a kind of a long-term view, the idea being that the optimal build-to-rent size of scheme is 350 units. You could complete it or get every unit let within a year, and that should provide you with a staggered tenancy expiry profile that means that on renewals you're not getting a big bulk at one point in time. But I think the really interesting part of that is then reflecting on learnings for single family, which is now becoming a new market. So what's particularly interesting about the single family housing market is any of the active players in that arena will tell you that there is no lead-in time. You complete a house, someone moves into it, there's not a period of time that it sits on the market. The demand is such that you can almost pre-let those units, and so you're then starting to remove the view of having this kind of churn and this void, because the tenant demand is there to immediately occupy as much as you can deliver. And I think such is the shortfall of stock in the UK. And I guess the other stat that I'd give you on that is how amplified that's become in the last 2 years. And of course, wider build to rent is seeded by a national desire to move away from bad practice from some PRS landlords towards a more institutionalised model. And so the implication of tax structuring and different routes of getting PRS landlords out of the market has been an exodus of those investors. And I think what then happened, so between 2016 and 2021, you probably saw 200,000 buy-to-let mortgage redemptions, which from the maths we were saying earlier is more than the total of new build-to-rent stock that's been built over that time. But what's then happened with the implications of kind of more financial pressures recently and rising interest rates is anyone who had a buy-to-let mortgage, suddenly, it's no longer accretive to own that property anymore. You can't get it back in your rent particularly easily. You can't offset mortgage costs. And so those landlords have also been looking to sell. So we've seen 200,000 buy-to-let mortgage redemptions in the last 2 years alone. So you look from 2016 to now, 400,000 buy-to-let landlords have left the market, and they've been replaced, or they've not been replaced, and that's the problem, and that's why we're seeing such unprecedented demand.
Well, I fall into both of those categories because I've rented my house for 20 years randomly, which I never thought I would, but I rent, and I had a portfolio of properties which I rented out, and of 20 or so, and they've all gone. So because it makes no sense. So one of the thoughts I've got is that build-to-rent units, We'll talk about supply and the next 10 years in a moment. But I think that the next build-to-rent units effectively are allowing owner-occupiers to have an opportunity to be able to buy something as a PRS unit comes back onto the market. So if there is effectively a cannibalisation of the market of build-to-rent of PRS units, then effectively it's helping the economy in a way because people are able to be owner-occupiers.
Yeah.
So, and it gives them the opportunity to buy it at probably a relative discount because of all the problems with the cost of keeping these mortgages going. So I think there's a bit of sense there probably.
There is, albeit that, and it's great in some respects, but the human impact could be if you're a young family with children in school, you're renting off a PRS landlord. That landlord has higher mortgage costs and no financial reason to stay. And then that's it. You'll either get a huge rent bill to cover the cost of that increased position for the landlord, or they'll tell you they're selling the house and you need to move out. And you can imagine the problems that could cause for the family living in that home. And I think again, part of the appeal of build to rent, if you have an institutional investor that is just interested in making sure people stay living in the homes that they're living in and that they're paying the rent there, and yes, rents can rise in line with inflation for a kind of market return, but I think the opportunity that having that professional landlord gives you is increasingly becoming something that the wider policymakers and renters are aware of.
So who is funding these schemes? Is it international money? Is it domestic money? Is it private equity money? I mean, you're like us. You like doing repeat deals with the same people because they're reliable and you're gonna do the deal. But we hear about these walls of capital coming in from America, Canada, blah. I won't steal your thunder. Where is there's a lot of money. Where is it all coming from? And who are the reliable ones, but who are the ones who are probably going to see it through and who are just on a whim to try and get a bargain?
There is a lot of capital chasing this sector. So CBRE just released its European Investor Intention Survey. Okay. We asked every major investor across Europe, where do you anticipate, or what's your priority investment asset class over the next year? It won't surprise you, the top two, beds and sheds. Of those, 27% of the investors that were interviewed said that living sector build to rent was their priority. So you can see globally that capital is prioritising investment into build to rent, having seen over the last number of years that the fundamentals look so compelling. We see high occupancy, we see high rent collection, we see limited bad debt. All of those things appeal to investors. And it still feels like we're only at the start of this journey relative to what's been in the US on multifamily. Where are the investors coming from? I think that answer probably changes at the point in the cycle that you're in, but it is a globally dominated asset class. In a Manchester context, over the last couple of years, we've done deals with the people from the Middle East, people from Asia, people from Australasia, people from the UK. And I think that's part of the appeal of the sector, is that it can appeal to so many different types of capital. I think where it becomes particularly interesting is a few different parts. So we're seeing the creation of lots of impact funds. Impact funds generally seeded by local government pension schemes, and that domestic capital is looking at how can we use our money to create a financial return, but also deliver some societal good. How can we deliver more affordable homes that maybe align with the income profile of our policyholders or our members? And I think that's quite compelling. How can we then build an ESG story that layers on top of that? We're also seeing pensions insurers coming in a really big way. So people like PIC and Energy have been the kind of preeminent names in that space and doing some very big deals that are, again, low cost capital. They want to own these schemes forever, and they're not bothered about outsized returns. It's all about a slow, steady, consistent income stream. But I think the opportunity for maybe the funding market, and for you asking that question maybe as a developer, I think the handbrake has been on the UK multifamily market because we've had just a series of challenges. It started with Brexit and it went through to COVID and then it went through to mini budget, and that series of events is what has I think, limited global capital moving into the UK rental market in a meaningful way. If you think about the scale of some investors across Europe, the likes of Heimstaden with 150,000 homes built within a 10-year window, that could be the same in the UK. That capital coming into this market could unlock a lot more housing delivery, but there's been so many barriers put in the way. And actually that's probably where we're most excited from a funding side in the next few years, is what happens post-Brexit. Now, global investors are maybe more comfortable with the UK and starting to see how they can be active in this market as well.
But I've also got a bit of a theory, I haven't told you about this theory, and a bit of a fear that a lot of the American and Canadian money comes to the UK first. They want to go to Europe, they want build to rent in Europe, and they go, right, we're going to open an office in London because they speak English in London, and we'll open an office in London, they do a couple of deals in the UK, and then they go, right, we need one in Barcelona, Paris, Milan, and they really struggle to go off and do things Europe-wide. And then they do another one in the UK, and they never really get to deliver their program and their strategy about going into Europe. Is that true? Are the Americans and the Canadians coming into London and opening a BTR investment program, and then not able to go Europe-wide? Is there a barrier into Europe for the American and Canadian money?
I think thinking in a UK context to start with, there is a lot of that capital that would like to invest in UK build to rent. I think it's harder for US capital that is potentially higher returning to be active in a market where interest rates are so low and you're competing with domestic capital with pretty core income fundamentals that are more after that kind of steady income than turbocharged rents. I think but we're definitely seeing Canadian pension funds as one being very active in this market. I think that the challenge they've had in really scaling to a level that would deliver kind of real meaningful operational efficiency has been the planning system. It's very slow to get schemes through. We've seen a whole load of build cost inflation adding to that, and it's just made it difficult to build a really big portfolio as quickly as that North American capital I think would like. Are they looking into Europe? Yes, is probably the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that when you go into Europe, you suddenly start to see rent control in different guises, and that regulated rental market becomes a lot harder for investors to understand. So you cross different jurisdictions with different caps and policies in place. It's a lot tougher to build a kind of meaningful scale like in the private sector like you would in the UK.
It's really interesting because we don't know anything about Europe in terms of build to rent, but it just seems to be that they come over, they say they can have a program, and then they come back and say, let's do another one in the UK because it's actually easier. So
and in part the fundamentals of the UK can be more compelling. The yield in the UK on a build to rent side could be 100, 200 basis points wider than it is in Germany, and we've just talked about the occupational fundamentals being you can rent that apartment as soon as it's there, and we've seen outsized rental growth. So you almost would question why you'd want to go to a different market when the UK feels like it's at the cusp of a growth moment and just needs some more schemes to come through the pipeline.
So I think it's a really interesting debate about where we are today, where we've come from. We've sort of touched upon where the future, or what does the future look like, but it all depends on viability, it all depends on numbers stacking up, and we've got a real problem at the moment with regard to interest rates and build costs. Land prices aren't really coming down, people aren't selling land really any cheaper than they were. There is some intervention, we are getting support in some way, shapes and forms with grant and debt and things like that. But when is the world going to get a bit easier? Because the weight of money that's there to go into this sector is huge, and probably they're all chomping at the bit and wanting to do more deals, but they can't because things don't stack up at the moment.
I think in the first instance we shouldn't take for granted those public sector bodies that are facilitating the delivery of new homes at the moment, and the likes of Wyco over in Leeds, the likes of GMCA here in Manchester, and of course Homes England are helping to deliver the grant funding or supporting capital to see schemes come forward at a moment in time where it's hard to do development. Whatever sector you're in the real estate market, you will find a challenge with development based on higher interest rate costs and higher construction costs. So being based in the north has had its benefits, I think, with those proactive devolved authorities trying to see stuff happen. And I think we will continue to need that capital over certainly the first half of this year to try and facilitate new schemes to come forward. As we move forward, the wider thesis is less new starts on site equal more hunger from contractors, which equals maybe not a contraction in construction costs, but suddenly a levelling off at the same point in time that you could maybe see the base rate coming in, allowing investors additional confidence and additional ability to borrow at accretive levels, which then means that values could start to uptick again. And those are the two dynamics that then need to converge to allow build-to-rent funding to happen at a meaningful scale. We need values to overtake the amount of inflation that we've seen in construction cost. When will that start to happen? I think we have really positive outlook on what could happen over the course of the next year or so. We're forecasting that the long-term base rate will revert back to 2.5%. If that happens, build-to-rent yields in the fours certainly look really compelling again. And we think that'll happen pretty quickly. I don't want to maybe speak out of turn relative to CBRE's own internal forecast, but...
Please do.
Well, I guess our sister business in the investment management side is forecasting up to 100 basis points of base rate cut over the course of this year, which will have a phenomenal impact in terms of encouraging investment activity back in the market. My personal view is a couple of consecutive cuts to the base rate will be that moment of peak optimism at which we start to see investors coming back in a meaningful way and trying to get ahead of the market. And I think there's an opportunity for that now for investors. Move quickly, get into a market where you can see that the green shoots of recovery are happening. What you don't want to do is think it's a brilliant time to invest in a few months, because before you know it, you're then going to be in competition with the rest of the market that's trying to catch up.
But there's a couple of people trying to ruin the party at the moment: student accommodation and co-living. And I do my paces in the morning around Manchester. I was down this morning by is it Union, the co-living scheme, massive co-living scheme. And I was thinking, where is this going to go? Is the current proliferation of student just taking advantage at the moment of some land supply, or is it here to stay, the growth of the student and co-living? Is it something that is sustainable? Because it's a complete new sector. Co-living doesn't exist. It's not like it's replacing anything at the moment, whereas build-to-rent is replacing PRS, which is established. So those two uses, are they going to spoil the party?
I think PBSA charts a trajectory for where build-to-rent could go. There's 750,000. That surprised me. 750,000 operational PBSA beds in the UK. So the base is 7 times higher than where we are in build-to-rent today, and that gives you, I guess, a sense in terms of where the growth of this market could go and beyond, given the fact that anybody could live in a rented apartment, a minority of people could live in a PBSA apartment. But I think in the short term, yes, we have seen a surge in demand for PBSA, and I think because the income fundamentals are particularly attractive there as well. It's in PBSA you get a very clear line of sight to the end of your tenancy and the ability to relet to the next, so you don't have issues with voids and constant management and churning between tenants. You can move from one tenancy straight into the next quite seamlessly. And
on co-living?
On co-living, I think there is no one-size-fits-all solution to co-living. There's lots of different. I think every developer, every investor has their own view on what co-living is and should be. There's some that are doing absolute core prime city centre London, and the idea being that you get the opportunity to live somewhere you might not otherwise, and you could walk to work in the city and something that isn't currently available. There's others that do co-living on the edge of the city, and the Collective is the example that's been used many times before, but their first scheme in Old Oak was a little bit further and maybe trying to offer something more affordable. And then there's questions on how big a scale, how small a scale. But I think the fundamental opportunity to provide a different type of accommodation is something that should be applauded. If I was a young professional now starting my career again and had the desire to move down to London, would living in a co-living block with a few like-minded individuals where I could still walk into a place of work and have all of the amenity I want on the doorstep appeal, I think yes it probably would. But it's obviously not going to be for everyone, and I think we just need to start to really interrogate these buildings now they're completed to see how they fit into the fabric of a city, and they're not replacing the different types of accommodation, they're just complementing it.
It never appears to me that affordable either. I've looked at a few of the co-living models, and I expect them to have significant air between what a BTR shared accommodation unit would be and what co-living would be in terms of rent, and there's no real demonstrable gap in that pricing. So I think that's the bit that I'm surprised by with co-living.
Yeah, but I think there's a lifestyle attachment to it. I think we're probably both surprised by some of the more premium build-to-rent schemes and the desire for occupiers, tenants to pay those rents, and I think that comes with a lifestyle ambition. A generation now would like to be able to walk to their place of work, would like to go to the gym, would like to work in the co-working space, and maybe want to be particularly more sociable and see other people in the building in the evening. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think the idea of having lots of different types of accommodation that mean if you're now a company looking at where you want to locate in the UK, you're maybe starting to prioritise those cities that have a whole array of different living options, such that your workforce can choose where they want to live. Do they want to live in a suburban house? Do they want to rent that suburban house? Do they want to live in a city apartment? Do they want to buy it? Do they want to rent it? Do they want to live in a serviced apartment or a co-living building? And are they prioritising community and delivery of service over potentially quantum of living space? But I think that is particularly, and I think in part that's what's driving the success of Manchester. Companies want to base here, work here, because they see that a new generation of talent is choosing to live in vibrant urban centres that don't just have to be London.
We touched upon it there about having options, and one of the options I was always interested in when we did the Keel, and it's applied all the way through, is how many of the units, how many of the homes would have be furnished, and with what sort of furniture. And again, I don't intend to dwell because we're running out of time, but we were using a yardstick of 80% would be furnished or 75%. When I was working in London and I'd had a flat, everything was furnished by the tenant effectively. Now no one furnishes their apartments and don't have to go and scrounge the furniture from the family and get it sent up from home. Is it a case where we're basically all of our apartments now should be 100% furnished? Is that the case? Do people ever want to furnish their apartments?
I think looking regionally on the build to rent side, as you say, almost everything is fully furnished. That's what the consumer who potentially is more footloose than previous generations wants. You can arrive and you can plug into the internet straight away. You have your furniture set up and you can move. But there's different parts of the living sector that do different things, and single family as an example, the general rule of thumb is you don't have furniture there, and maybe you live there for a little bit longer, so you might put in your own bed and your own kit because you're then intending on staying for a longer duration.
I see, that's right. Well, it's just interesting. I was thinking about it with options because there are so many different flavours and permutations. What have I missed on build to rent before we start talking about you again?
What have you missed on build to rent? I think we covered quite a lot of ground in all of that. I think it's a super exciting sector. I think it allows a lot more capital to come into the market and deliver new homes, which is fundamentally the most important part of what we're doing. And I think there is a lot of learnings that we can take over the last few years. I think the other thing I would add from a CBRE perspective now is we've brought in Andrew Saunderson as our head of residential capital markets more nationally, and Andrew's background is particularly fascinating as well. He worked at Grainger for nearly 2 decades, I think, in that they were the original PRS build to rent landlord in the UK. So we've taken a lot of learnings from some of the things that Andrew's picked up in that career at Grainger and being the early adopters. But I think now we're able to start really meaningfully looking at, that 100,000 of existing build to rent units in the UK, take those lessons and work out what we can go and do to make the next wave of development even more successful.
Well, thank you for talking about the BTR sector and educating our listeners. What do you do outside work? How do you relax? Because you've got a hugely intense job. You're young, you've got the energy, that's granted, but it is big. What you're doing, just before Christmas, you were doing a big deal for us, big deal in the summer for us, and you've got numerous other clients. It's not just Glenbrook that you serve, unfortunately. So how do you relax? And I think I know the answer in part to this, but tell us what you do in your spare time.
So I walked in today with a double espresso in hand, trying to make sure trying to make sure I didn't look tired.
I thought that was to be on form for this podcast.
Well, you surprised me with the cameras as well. But, why did I do that? We've got a 3-month-old baby, baby Theo, which is fantastic. And a whole new kind of outlook on life.
And you moved house and had a baby at the same time.
Moved house, had a baby, bought a car, all of the big life decisions in one go. Those things tend to get clustered together. I have a renewed appreciation for people that can move into somewhere that's up and built and ready and doesn't require a load of work doing to it. So in terms of downtime, that's been a bit more challenging of late. But I think that I referenced it briefly earlier in saying I was initially attracted to CBRE because it's a global firm. The second he's old enough, we want to go travelling and visit different parts of the world again, and go and see and experience different cultures and places and things. And I think that's what we're looking forward to starting to be able to do.
If you want to experience different cultures, you can head to Liverpool.
Back to the roots.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for your time. It is fascinating, even though we chat a fair bit about these things. It's interesting to hear it and talk about it more widely. And thank you very much for giving me your time. And hopefully we'll get your dad in soon to find out whether your story is true and your upbringing and whether you were a cantankerous teenager or not, and we'll hear that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us and good luck for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.